The regular season is 25% done, and we might have as many questions about the Miami Heat as we do answers. But to help us take stock and what's happened so far and what might happen next, we're joined by WQAM's Brandon Tobin to talk about Miami's strengths and weaknesses, who stood out, and who's been a disappointment so far, and the team's biggest need moving forward. It's the State of the Heat edition of today's Locked On Heat.
You are Locked On Heat, your daily Miami Heat podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Heat, your daily podcast on the Miami Heat. However you might be tuning in on YouTube, Odyssey, or on your favorite podcast app, thank you for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. I'm Wes Goldberg here with David Ramil. Really excited to welcome back to the program Brendan Tobin, who's going to help us take stock in the Heat now that we've approached the quarter mark of the season. We've got our five biggest questions coming up, including who has been the Heat's best player, their biggest disappointment, what is their biggest need, but let's start with what we think has been their biggest strength. Tobin, let's start with you.
Man, I feel like their biggest strength off the bat has been still their ability to adapt. I think that's been the thing that has been most impressive about them, is that this is a team that still hasn't really had their two top scorers from last year be able to play with one another. And so they're trying to find new ways to win. And we knew that you know, the whole mantra that I'm running it back going into this year was something that, you know, made some of the fans' stomach turn, but it was a lot of guys trying to fit into new roles. And, you know, it was such a tough fight for them to get back to 500 the first time. And it did feel a lot like that Suns win was going to be a turning point for them. And then all of a sudden, bam, Jimmy Butler goes down and you got to kind of scramble again. And you go on this tough road trip, which I think would have been tough with Jimmy Butler anyway, because we do know that there are some size concerns there. But to not have him and to be shorthanded like that, and you're scrounging with all these young guys and, you know, rookies and all that stuff to try and figure things out with, you know, Bam banged up. I've been impressed with some of their resolve to know we haven't really, I think, gotten a true test of what they are yet, or a real sense of what they are yet. But acknowledging that, you know, that the slow start and putting themselves in this position was a little bit disappointing too.
Yeah, we really haven't seen like a clear sample of what this team is. Obviously, we got it at the beginning of the year, but things were so clunky with Herro in the mix and trying to get used to what this defense is going to be. I'm with you, not just the resolve and all that kind of stuff, but the versatility that they've shown on defense, switching in between schemes as seamlessly as they have early in games too. Like in the first quarter, they'll like whip out three different schemes sometimes. Like the other day, it's like box and 1, 2-3 zone, man to man. And you're just like, how are they doing this all the time? But that is an interesting thing. Like, do we feel like when Jimmy comes back, even though we haven't really seen like what this team is, given that this team is starting to kind of figure out an identity with the defensive multiple like kind of schemes that they have, with the fact that Caleb Martin and Bam Adebayo are getting going, Tyler Herro's back, it seems like he's starting to figure out his place in that starting lineup and what they want to do offensively. Do we even feel like we're starting to kind of get our bearings a little bit in terms of what we think the Heat might be?
I think it's tough to say. You know, it's going to be interesting to see what happens this week if Jimmy comes back for the Boston games, which I guess if you see on the social media activity, and what his trainer's saying, it sounds like he's going to be back. I think that's going to be an interesting measuring stick for them, because that's going to be about as whole as they're going to get, because we really don't know what the Victor Oladipo factor is going to be. It doesn't sound like we're going to know what Omer Yurtseven's going to bring to this team this year. So I think this is going to be as good a measuring stick as you're going to get over these next couple of games. And to really get a sense of it. I'm not so worried about, you know, how are they going to fit around Jimmy, or how is everybody going to handle that? I think they have a lot of experience dealing with that over the last couple of years, because, you know, Jimmy's always going to miss his 15 to 20 games. And I think that these guys kind of know what the default is. I think a lot of that's defaulted to, you know, let Tyler and Bam kind of run the show a little bit. Kyle's doing what he does, and sometimes he has his shot going, sometimes he doesn't. But I am curious to see if Jimmy is back for these Boston games, and knowing that you maybe can expect some rust from him, but you know, I think this is going to be as good a measuring stick as we can get to really get a sense of, are they is this a very close matchup like it was last year in the playoffs, or has Boston really spread the gap that far?
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you about the you talked about the resolve of the team and everything else, and yeah, obviously they showed it last year, but this year it seems like it's been harder for them to do so. What do you think's been the difference? Is it a talent disparity? Is it just more injuries or different? Just trying to incorporate everybody in this new lineup, and maybe that's been the difference maker, or do you see something else as being a factor?
I definitely think that early on, man. I think that there were. I think there was some like lacklusterness to the start of the season. I don't deny that. I think we could all kind of feel it. It's like, wow, we have so much season ahead, and guys can take it two ways. Look, Boston seems like they've taken it and they're going on, similar to like what the Bucks did when they won the title. Is like they got embarrassed and they took that and they, stormed. I think for the Heat, right. They're at a bit of a different end because they don't have two hungry 25, 26-year-olds. Their team is led by a 37-year-old Kyle Lowry and a 33-year-old Jimmy Butler. And they know that they have a lot of time to kind of figure this thing out. And they could probably look at Boston in that series and be like, look, Boston didn't figure it out till January last year. Yeah. And they were just fine. So I definitely think that there was a real lack of urgency from them early on in the season. And I think we could definitely see that in the transition defense and just overall, just the lack of resolve they had in some of those. But I do think that it has flipped. I think injuries kind of forced them into that a little bit.
Yeah.
And I think that's put them in almost in a weird way in a better spot because they've had to play with that desperation. They needed it.
That's an interesting kind of concept. I feel like they've woken up because they were basically backed into a corner, partly because of themselves and the injuries too. But to go back to the biggest strength, David, would you agree that it's the team's resolve that they've shown after kind of being backed into that corner?
You know what? I got to be honest with you. We've talked about Caleb a lot on the show, but I think he adds a dynamism to that starting lineup that was missing last year with PJ. You know what you were getting with him, this kind of steady, slow production. There'd be the occasional drive to the basket, that drives along the baseline, the 3-point shot. But with Caleb in there, I think it's just a little bit more dynamic. And it's just been so infrequent, but you see glimpses of it when the passing is on point. And I think even recently, like in the last couple of games, the Wizards games, the 3 straight wins, they've just shown like this element of passing, athleticism, just all the different pieces kind of finding a way to mix. When things are on point for this team, it's actually really nice basketball. It's just been so infrequent that they have to work for almost every game, every possession. But when it does click, it's a really nice thing. That to me is ultimately their greatest strength, because when you see it, and again, it's been so infrequent, it's a really, really nice version of basketball and of this team, the best version of this team. So I think that's still their greatest strength. I just don't know how sustainable it is. And we haven't seen this team healthy enough to determine that yet. So it's still, I think the jury's still out, but for now, I would say that's probably their greatest strength.
A couple of interesting stats. You mentioned the passing there. The Heat 4th in the NBA, averaging about 306 passes made per game. That's 10 more passes than they made last year, and they ranked closer to the middle of the pack last year. Just one other thing in terms of biggest strengths, if we want to get into specifics, 2nd in the NBA in free throw percentage behind only the Boston Celtics, and they give up the fewest attempts of free throws in the NBA. So that's a pretty good gap, and that makes it kind of you start to figure out why this team is even 10 and 11. It's because of the free throw discrepancy has been such their biggest strength. Defense.
Shout out to the Suns for that, right?
Yeah.
What did they take 4 free throw attempts in that game? That was pretty great.
The Heat recently just got back into 8th place in defensive rating too, after being as far as 20th, I think, in the NBA in defensive rating. So that's been nice too. Biggest weakness, Tobin, what do you think?
Man, their biggest weakness. I definitely think that the size thing is going to be tough in certain matchups. And I think that's going to be curious to see where things go, because you do look at some of the matchups they're going to have. Look, Milwaukee, Cleveland, and Boston, especially when they get Robert Williams back, that's going to be tough for them in the playoffs. And I do wonder, how do they counter that? How is it going to be when they have to work this hard in a playoff series and also try and get those tough baskets? I do know that they have very unorthodox guys. Their 2 best players are very unorthodox in Bam and Jimmy, in that they're not only, maybe your 2 most reliable scorers, maybe you want to throw Tyler in there, but they're also your best defenders. So, I think that is still a fair unanswered question for them. And I think one of the things that people had with this roster construction going into that year, and not having PJ Tucker in that situation, is that loss going to be felt? Yeah. I didn't think we had like the best version of PJ Tucker in the playoffs last year. I think that, he even admitted he was kind of a shell of himself by the middle of the year. He wasn't feeling physically great. So I am worried about that. But, to David's point, man, I think the element that they're getting from Caleb Martin and what he's showing in some of these abilities to take over games, that was probably a more critical thing that they didn't have in the postseason last year. And having extra go-to guys and extra options outside of Jimmy and Bam certainly healthy had to do with that with some of the other guys. But I do think for certain matchups, I am still concerned about what that's going to be like. And I know it's a tough fix because, Bam is, as much people want to put him in the power forward. And I think that's what everybody, in these kind of, conventional basketball lineups, they want him as this 4 with some behemoth in the middle. But I just look, it's been how many seasons? He's their 5 and he's going to be their 5, and everybody's kind of got to get used to that. And guess what? He's a pretty excellent 5 to have. He's one of the best two-way players in the league. And I think that they got to find other solutions around him more than maybe putting him in an uncomfortable position.
Well, to your point, when they've found the appropriate 4 to line up next to him, what have they done? They've gotten into the NBA Finals and then got within a shot of making the NBA Finals. Every season that they've had over the last 3 years, an appropriate 4 next to Bam, it's taken them really far. I just think that they need to. I'm with you. I think they need a little bit more size. I don't know if it's necessarily the starting lineup issue. I think it's still one of the 3 or 4 best starting lineups in the Eastern Conference when these guys are healthy. But to have those options off the bench would be nice. They don't really have those guys. Dwayne Dedmon's been playing better lately after kind of a slow start there, but they're 23rd in the league in rebounding rate. That's too low for this team. They got to be up higher, especially with how they've been shooting lately, which has not been good. And that's kind of where I'm going, is like the 3-point shooting has not been as good as it was last year. They were the best 3-point shooting team in the league by percentage. Now they're 24th, and it's easy to see why. Max Strus is shooting 35.6%. Duncan Robinson is shooting 30.6%. Gabe Vincent is shooting 30% from 3-point range. Those were the guys last year. It was them and Caleb Martin. Caleb Martin's still shooting 40%, but other than him, those were sort of the guys that were able to surround Jimmy and Bam with the spacing that they need, and they just haven't really had it. Granted, Strus and Robinson are injured right now, but David, I'm curious what you think.
Yeah, I mean, it's easy to point to the rebounding and size. So you guys have covered it pretty extensively. Obviously, that is a huge problem for them moving forward. But I can tend to see this picture kind of in a macro view, and I think there's still an over-reliance on Jimmy Butler that they just haven't solved. And I know they kind of tried to address it over the offseason with the rumored trades for KD and Donovan Mitchell, but even with this version of Bam that we've seen over the last handful of games, an improved Kyle Lowry, Caleb Martin stepping up, there's still we kind of, as a collective fan base or media, we're just kind of seeing this version of this team and going, they'll be all right, they'll figure it out, because once playoff Jimmy resurrects the way he always has every April, he'll save this team and he'll carry them deep into playoffs. But I just don't know if you can rely on. I mean, if you look at the last 3 seasons, trip to the finals, swept by the Bucks, almost trip to the finals. What's next? Is it going to be another sweep? Are they going to be able to count on Jimmy Butler? Can teams in the Eastern Conference find a way to take him out of the equation in a playoff run? So I think even though we haven't had enough of Jimmy the first 21 games of the season, I still see that as probably the biggest team moving forward and heading into the playoffs.
The Heat with Jimmy Butler have an offensive rating, not to be like stat guy on this podcast, but like I have a bunch of interesting numbers. Jimmy Butler with Jimmy Butler, offensive rating of 119.9 this season. That's tied for the Celtics' best offensive rating in the league when Jimmy Butler is playing. When Jimmy Butler is off the court, that's a 103 offensive rating for the Heat. By far the worst in the NBA. By far the worst in the NBA. By the way, to go back to Strus, Duncan, and Gabe, they're not going to shoot like that for the rest of the year. There's going to be a regression back up to the mean there for them. And then once you kind of get that and Jimmy coming back, then you expect Miami to kind of lift up. I don't think they'll be top 10 in offense, but I think they'll be above average, where right now they're sort of in the bottom 10. But we're going to talk about who the best player has been for the Miami Heat and the biggest disappointment so far this season. But David, first, tell the listeners about Herro.
Today's episode is brought to you by Herro. It's the world's largest car sharing marketplace. Patero, you can book any car you want, wherever you want it, from a community of local hosts. You can browse a huge selection of vehicles for just about any occasion or budget across the US, UK, Canada, and Australia. You can book a spacious SUV or a minivan for a family road trip. You can get a classic or luxury car for a special event, a birthday, or a holiday. You can find affordable economy cars if you're on a budget, or if you just need to get from point A to point B. You can test drive that new electric vehicle you've had your eye on to see how it fits in your everyday life. Any Turo host can deliver the car right to you. Every trip is backed by liability insurance. Terms, conditions, and exclusions do apply. Forget boring rental cars and find your drive at Turo.com. That's Turo.com.
Thank you for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. For your next listen, check out the Locked On Sports Today podcast, the biggest stories of the day, plus instant reactions, big game recaps, and the take of the day. It's available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, wherever you get your podcast. Joined now by Brendan Tobin from the Tobin and Lowry Show. You can find that also wherever you find your podcast, as well as Tobin's YouTube channel, full of some great takes over there. But let's talk best player of the season for the Miami Heat. Tobin, do you have a surprise answer here, or are you going to go with, I think, the obvious choice?
Do you want me to do boring? I'll tell you what, like best player, I feel like it is a 2-horse race. I do think there's an argument to say Bam has been or Jimmy has been. I think there's fair arguments for both. But man, I will say, like, I'll let you guys kind of go on that playpen. Caleb Martin's last handful of games for me, I mean, that sequence he had yesterday with the block and then hitting the three, it was so good. And I do really think that he is unlocking a lot of stuff. He's just such a, we talk about all the stories, and I almost feel like even still, he's like the one that's still most unsung out of all of them, because I just think back to last year in the preseason where, like, hey, it's a cute story. Look, he's starting against his brother at the end of the preseason. What a cute thing Spo did. And how much they've gone to rely upon him and reinvigorate him and to, give him a multi-year deal and to really believe in his talents. And I really think that, I think that, Max, as far as the undrafted guys, he's still fighting for that contract, so you can understand why he's bringing that effort and energy every night. And he's certainly taking leaps. But I do think that for the guys that they've rewarded, Caleb looks like he is in a lot of ways a bargain deal and is really, really helping them out. And, that to his credit, I think he came into the season with the most question marks and certainly had a lot of stuff that he had to adjust to, because you come from being the spark plug, cute story off the bench to now you're the starter. Now there's expectations. People will know who you are. So I know who the best guys are, but for me, he's so far, I think, maybe the best story of the Heat season so far.
I've got a theory about that. I think with his brothers coming due to injury, maybe he's absorbed his power. Like maybe they share as twins, like equal amount of power, and it distributes depending on who's the
weird powers. Maybe, maybe
it's possible. Like he's stolen it while he recovers, and then when Cody comes back, he'll regress back to normal. Who knows? It's a possibility. You never know with twins. They're a dangerous breed.
They should just trade off now and then, but like Charlotte's not going to make the playoffs, so as long as the Heat make the playoffs,
shut him down, shut him down for the rest of the year. Yeah, so Caleb could be the Super Saiyan version of himself, right?
I love Super Saiyan. I love that Dragon Ball Z reference. Well, this is kind of what I always describe, at least internally in my own head, what the Heat's lineup is. The starting lineup is sort of the Super Saiyan version of like where the Warriors would get to when they had Draymond at the 5. And look, that's not a new take. Even Pat Riley compared Bam Adebayo to Draymond Green when he drafted Bam. But you look at what, for instance, the Warriors were able to do last year. Their finals winning lineup was when they shifted Draymond and they started games with him at the 5, Otto Porter Jr. at the 4, and then obviously, Wiggins, Steph, and Clay. And look, I'm not comparing the Warriors to the Heat totally, but when you have Bam at the 5, and he's obviously a full-time 5 in a way that Draymond Green even isn't, but you can put Caleb Martin next to him, who's such a dynamic offensive player and a dynamic two-way player. And then you can, if you get those like shooters and cutters around them, it just spaces the floor so much. And there's so much movement and so much passing and cutting and screening and all that kind of stuff. It kind of does tap into that version. And so look, Caleb Martin's been awesome. The advanced stats also love Caleb Martin. Like he's got the best, according to Cleaning Glass, the best plus minus on the team, even ahead of Bam Adebayo, who I think has been Miami's best player. They've been plus 10 points better per 100 possessions with Bam on the court versus when he's off the court. I think it's like plus 20 when Caleb is on and off. Some of that is just based on the fact that Caleb Martin's backups are even worse than Bam Adebayo's backups, but Caleb Martin has been awesome. So I don't mean to take anything away from him. And I also feel like he's sort of, I've said this before, Tobin, but found his voice as a starter in this lineup. Before, I thought he was trying to too often be PJ Tucker or be Jay Crowder, or kind of playing that mold, and lately and just sort of sat in the corner and was doing those things. And then he's sort of just been unleashed lately. Have you felt the same thing?
Yeah, and I think that's a good point, because we know that these guys hear all that noise. I think he knew the PJ Tucker stuff, but like, look, these guys are all on social media. I'm sure he gets, Heat Nation, Heat are serious pursuers of Jay Crowder. Like, these guys all know, and as much as you want to prove yourself, yeah, I'm sure that puts a little bit of pressure on you, because he doesn't want to lose any part of his starting lineup or key contributing minutes. He wants to continue to flourish and prove that he could be a very important piece for this team. But I do think that he has shown a lot of that. I think we definitely know that defensively he is not scared to go up against anybody. But I do like that brashness that we're starting to see from him on the offensive end, to go look for stuff, to be cocky in his jump shot. I think that to me has been the most impressive thing, is that he if he feels like he's feeling it, he will just kind of tell people to get out of the way and do his own thing. So that's been what's really been impressive about Caleb. I think we all recognize this. If you speak with him, he off the court is a very confident individual in himself, but it is tough when you're kind of in that ecosystem of, here's Kyle Lowry, here's Jimmy Butler, here's Bam Adebayo, here's Tyler Herro fit in. And we can see for some guys it works, some guys it takes a while, some guys like Duncan Robinson, they kind of runs its course. And I think that he wants to, maybe be this piece's Max Strus. Like, Max was kind of the perfect fit by the end of last year. He wants to make sure he stays that all of this year.
Should we talk about the biggest disappointments? I can get us started right away, and I think it's obvious. The injuries have been obviously a disappointment, but among the biggest ones, Victor Oladipo, Omer Yurtseven, neither of them yet playing. I think everybody who watches this team has got to be disappointed that we haven't seen any of Victor Oladipo, Omer Yurtseven. David, do you have a pick between those two or something else?
Well, I wanted to piggyback off of the conversation about the best player so far. I wanted to give Kyle Lowry his flowers, because the obvious answer is Bam Adebayo, but I just still think if you had predicted this year that he'd be one of the league leaders in minutes per game, I just don't think anybody would have envisioned that. Like, he's had such a tremendous bounce back. And even when he struggled in his first game of the season, everybody was just writing him off. And it's like, oh, okay, get this bum off the team. Still a large, I think, swath of the Heat fan base that wants him traded. But at the same time, when you have to manage your expectations with him, just as we have come to learn that with Bam, he's never going to be that 40-point per game scorer. He is a game manager. He's always been that. He's going to have moments where he's going to be hitting that shot and comfortable. And look, he's still one of the better point guards in the NBA, just by virtue of the way he gets everybody unlocked and gets everybody going. And we've seen that lately, the way that Bam, Caleb, and others have stepped up their game. So I just wanted to shout that out. But as far as
is that your version of Tyler Herro, just looking at the camera and saying Kyle Lowry from West Philadelphia, and then Kyle Lowry correcting him? Sorry, North Philadelphia, North Philly. I don't know if you guys saw that clip.
And to that point too, like, Kyle, like, look, a lot was made of the comments that he made. Like, I didn't hear what Pat Riley said. First of all, I don't believe that. I think it's just Kyle is 30, in his mid 30s, and doesn't feel like he needs to be told that. But look, the guy worked his absolute butt off in Vegas this offseason.
Well, maybe not his butt off. I mean, come on.
No, of course.
That's a lot to work with there, Brendan. Come on.
Of course. But he really did get himself in tremendous shape. And I do think, like, you can see, like, he is. I mean, he looked pretty exhausted at one point yesterday, but this guy has put himself at the beginning of the season. It's not like he is playing himself into shape. He came in pretty off the bat, ready to have a heavy workload, and it's probably been heavier than he thought, because Jimmy's hurt again, and Tyler was hurt. So, that I think you have to give him a lot of credit for.
Yeah, I mean, his conditioning was an issue last year, especially when they got to the playoffs. It's been a strength of his this year. And Bam actually recently told me that he went and visited Lowry in Vegas during those workouts, and he said it looks like he's got his joy back. We all know that Lowry had to miss a lot of time because of the personal reasons, and there was a lot of distractions away from basketball in his first season in Miami. And Bam going so far as to say he's enjoying basketball again. And just that could take things so much further for a player. Do we want to get to biggest disappointment now?
Yeah, I mean,
Right.
I think it's Oladipo. I think that's pretty
Yeah.
fair. I think we had expectations for a version of Omer Yurtseven that we really have yet to see. He thrived last year when he was starting, and everybody thought he'd be the perfect complement to Bam, and another big that could offset some of those rebounding issues that we talked about. But I think there was just these great expectations of Oladipo, just as there have been over the last 4 or 5 seasons, even before he was acquired by Miami, that he was going to be either a starter or the sixth man of the year candidate, that he was going to thrive, he was going to lead whatever unit he was out there as a Jimmy level replacement, a guy who could provide high defense, he could make plays for others, he could space the floor, he could drive to the rim. And just unfortunately, it just seems like another one of a recurring theory of a series of injuries for him. And who knows? We're at the point now where I think a lot of us have just come to expect that we can't expect anything out of Oladipo. That I don't know that we're going to get any version of him, much less the version that we were all expecting at the start of the season.
Tough to rely on him, right, Tobin?
Yeah, I think it is tough, especially because he was so. All of the vibes you got off of him was that he was going to come in and make an immediate impact.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody had this impression, and then him not playing in the preseason was kind of a downer. You're like, why is that? What's going on there? And with this organization, you never really know what is going to happen with him. When is he going to come back? So that's certainly been disappointing. But I think it's tough to put it on injury for me. Yes, I'm obviously disappointed that he's not playing. I would say if I had to go biggest disappointment, I'd probably go. I don't feel like we even scratched the surface of what Tyler can be, and I think for me, he's getting everything that he wanted. He's got the big contract. He is starting. And I don't quite think that he has had enough of those, juggernaut performances, that guy who has the bounce in his step. We saw a little bit of that in the Washington game. Certainly, I'll give him a pass because he is coming back from injury. But I think also, Tyler putting all that work into his body and the durability for him, I think was a bit of a question mark too. So, and we talk about the shooting numbers, Tyler, I think everybody talks about, I remember Spo saying this, he was questioning if Tyler can be that Max Strus guy. Can he be that spacer? And I think he's got to do a little bit better of a job of finding his way of being that knockdown shooter, because we know how talented he is. We can all see his pregame routines and the kind of bucket getter he is. But I think that because of the expectations I had of him and where I don't think he's really hit yet, I think that he's probably that guy for me so far, and I still have confidence that he's going to get there,
right?
But I don't think we've really gotten out of that Tyler Herro run yet so far this year.
I just want to see him moving off the ball a little bit more when he's trying to fit along those starters, because right now I don't really see much of a difference between Tyler Herro running the second unit last year and him basically running the starting unit this year. Kyle Lowry, his usage rating when Tyler Herro's on the court just plummets to like nothing levels. It's crazy, and Lowry needs to have the ball in his hands in order to be most effective. Jimmy Butler does too. Bam Adebayo does too, and all these things. I love what we saw against Atlanta with the Tyler Herro to Bam lobs, but I want to see more than just the pick and roll stuff with him. He's gotten better as a playmaker and these kinds of things, but he's such a knockdown, catch and shoot 3-point shooter, where, to your point, Tobin, it feels like he's almost makes it too hard on himself with these pull up jumpers and things, and you see those percentages dip. It's like things could be so much easier for you if you look. Nobody's Steph Curry or Klay Thompson, but if you just watch some film on those guys and start running around the way that those guys do, the way that Devin Booker does, the way that some of the best 3-point shooters, Max Strus on your own team, the way that they just run around off of screens and stuff, and then you can hit that next level of stuff that Tyler Herro can do that Duncan Robinson and Max Strus can't, in terms of attacking defenses off the catch and being a really good passer instead of just like an adequate one. I think that can open up Miami's offense so much more. And to your point, I don't think we've even started to scratch the surface on that. I do wonder if the coaches are trying to push him in that direction, or if they're just sort of happy with this sort of two conflicting offenses when it kind of feels like in that starting lineup when it's Jimmy Butler, Kyle Lowry, and Tyler Herro on the court. I don't know.
I was just going to say, I don't see why you don't put him in that Ray Allen offensive package of going around screens, when it's not like he's saving his energy for defense either. So that's not really a concern. And you can't have good catch and shoot numbers when you're over dribbling the ball either. So that's a problem. So
I do think it takes time, just like it did with Caleb Martin and Tyler Herro did miss a lot of games with the ankle injury. And I think I think they'll get to that point. They just obviously haven't gotten to it yet through the first quarter of the season. And he's missed half those games.
I also think for him, look, you hear all the rumblings all off season
That's true.
Donovan Mitchell, whatever trade rumor guy. Essentially, everybody is looking for that. Who is going to be that go-to scorer next to Jimmy? And maybe it's going to be Bam. It's certainly awesome to see what he's been doing with Jimmy out. And I certainly think that he's capable of it, especially when, he seems very, very hard to guard without fouling. But I think also because of Tyler Herro's the difficulty of his shot making ability, which I do think he has a bigger variety than Bam does. There's no excuses this year for him. Like he's got plenty of time. He's been with these guys for a long time. I think that they have done everything they can to try and help him flourish. And so for me, it just comes down to, hey, like, you've been in the league now. It's you got skunked last year in the playoffs. Yes, there was some injury, but he also admitted that there's a lot of mental stuff that were draining him too, and that's gone to him in a couple of years now. And Lord knows he's had a lot of public stuff out there that I understand why that can be stressful. Trade rumors, having 2 children by the time you're 23, having a famous Instagram girlfriend, all that stuff can weigh on you. But as far as the basketball stuff, you cannot find yourself in a better situation than being in a Miami Heat organization where, you have 2 alpha guys on this team in Bam and Jimmy, and they're also doing a lot of the hard work on defense. You're basically out there, dude, go score, go be able to fill in make it easier however you can. And like you guys said, I do think that sometimes he tries to make it a little bit more difficult on himself than he has to.
What are the Heat missing and how can they address it? That's coming up next. But first, today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn Talent Solutions. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. Like hiring a great producer for your podcast or an assistant who makes your day-to-day that much easier. There's nothing like making that perfect hire to help your business. That's why you need to check out LinkedIn Jobs, which makes it incredibly easy to create a free job post. Plus, you can add that job post in the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you're hiring. Simple tools like screening questions make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus the leading competitors. So if you still need to hit your annual goals, get some help around the holidays, or close out that final round of KPIs, LinkedIn Jobs can help you end the year right. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find qualified candidates that you want to talk to faster. Post your jobs for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, what has been the biggest need for the Miami Heat this season so far? In other words, where's the biggest area of opportunity? What's something that's missing with this group? David, I'll start with you.
I think the obvious one, availability, right? You want to be able to see some kind of consistency one way or the other. And I keep coming back to this point, is that I just don't know what this team is. Like, we've seen flashes of what they can be. There are expectations for what they can be at the same time without Jimmy Butler, with this lesser version of Tyler. And I think that's fair to say. And then with this new and improved version of Bam, like, we want all these pieces to mesh together, but it's just been so difficult to find them in order to kind of just take anything away from that and form our own concept of what their identity could be and how they could be moving forward. So I know we can talk trade talks and say, oh, they need this player or that player or something like that, or they could need more size. But to me, I just want them to be more available so that we can get a consistent idea of what this group could be.
So they need to get younger. They need like a Benjamin Button time machine style thing.
That would be good. I don't see that happening. I don't know. A magic elixir that keeps them healthy, I suppose. I don't know if that's an option for them, but yeah, that'd be great.
Tobin, what do you think?
I think you alluded to it a little bit earlier. I think that having them have that threat of being, one of the most dangerous teams from downtown, I think that to me feels like from night to night a crapshoot. And I think that the names that you see there and how much respect they get from other defenses, I know that the Heat are not necessarily just a results oriented organization with this stuff. They'll say, it's about getting up shots and creating spacing and creating all that gravity. That's great. I also just want to see him knock down shots. Like it's very cute to hear every game after Spo, but I would love to just know, like, can we get 2021 Duncan Robinson back? Can we get, Max Strus on a more consistent level? Same with Gabe and honestly, Tyler, like going back to him, like, I think that, having that threat, I think will just make some games a little bit easier. Cause I think to your guys' point, earlier in the podcast, it feels like a lot of these games, they're having to really just get into drag out fights every single night. And I do think that, if they can have a night every now and then where 3-point shots are just flowing for them, you blow out a team that you're a lot more talented than. Certainly the 3-point shot can be the great equalizer, and you can have the random, heat scrub killer that everybody likes to point out on Twitter. But I think for me, that's the biggest need, is to just get back to the capability that those guys are from downtown. And I think that would help a lot too.
Good point.
I think getting Oladipo back and Yurtseven back and just some of these bodies, sort of combining both of these answers. Like, this team never planned for Max Strus to be the sixth man and lead the second unit. That was never the idea. The idea was for Victor Oladipo to run that second unit and do the drive and kicking that we know that he could do, and get Strus and Duncan Robinson and Gabe Vincent these open shots. But Gabe Vincent, Max Strus, they've been thrust into this role of having to run second unit offense. And I think that's in turn kind of hurt their shooting percentages because they got so much more on their plate than they ought to have in the first place. And so I think getting availability back will help the 3-point shooting. I also think this team just needs January 15th to come along, not to call for trades or anything like that, like anything specifically here, but it also feels like they need athleticism, size, other options. I think Eric Spoelstra said that this team was really, really versatile coming into the season. He kept talking about the team's versatility. I got to be honest, I haven't really seen it being all that versatile. I don't know where the versatile options are. It just feels like it's Bam Adebayo, Jimmy Butler, and Kyle Lowry. Just those three make you versatile, but I don't think that this roster 1 through 14 is all that versatile. It kind of just seems like you have duplicates of a lot of the same kinds of players. So if they can kind of switch things up and get some more size, maybe some more athleticism coming off the bench, and just some other options that they can get to. Obviously, getting Yurtseven back would help because he would be another option. Oladipo, like I said, these guys would be other options, but it just feels like this team needs something else to go to when the guys that they're asking night to night, just if the shot's not falling, if they're not available because of health or whatever it is. That's the other thing I would say is the biggest need. Anything else? Do we have a couple speed round questions, David, that you want to get to?
Sure, I guess we could do that. Knocked over my mic there. Let's see. Okay, Brendan. Tobin, or what do you prefer, Brendan or Tobin? What do you prefer, actually?
Whatever you want, David. It's either one I will respond to, as long as you don't call me Brandon, which is basically why I go with Tobin, because nobody ever seems to get Brendan right for whatever reason. They've just been rolling with Brandon, I guess. Which is weird. I haven't met that many Brandons, but it was always more popular. So I said, you know what? Let's just go last name when we get into the broadcasting biz.
All right, cool. All right, Tobin. Best trade target for the Miami Heat right now. Ideal trade target.
Man. Ideal trade target for the Miami Heat. I don't know how it would work chemistry wise. I would be intrigued to see what like a Miles Turner would do on this team, just from a off the bench type, but I don't know. He's been available for 3 years, so I don't know how much the Miami Heat like feel about going and getting somebody like him. Certainly when he played the Heat, he looked like he was trying to audition. I think every one of those guys in the Pacers is trying to get the hell out of there, maybe outside of Halliburton. But that would intrigue me. I think that I will say, look, I thought Dwayne Dedmon was, no pun intended, dead in the water. Like, I thought, like, oh my God. And learning that he was dealing with the foot injuries made a lot more sense, because he has looked a lot better with them trying to manage that. But I still don't know how much with him dealing with those lingering foot injuries and being the size that he is. I don't know how much you can rely upon him to be what he is. And he does feel like a guy who can really just give you a good 12 minutes a night.
Wes, what do you say? What's the best trade target right now?
I mean, the guy that I had circled before the season was Harrison Barnes, but it doesn't seem like Sacramento's making anybody available, especially not Harrison Barnes, who's been really good for them, but he can't shoot, but he's been good for them overall. I am interested in Miles Turner. I don't know that the Pacers are going to trade Miles Turner with how they've been playing lately. It kind of feels like they're going to stick to what they've got. Maybe they'll move Buddy Hield because they do have depth there in the backcourt, but Miles Turner's been really good for them. John Collins is a name that I keep coming back to. I mentioned just youth, athleticism, size. Like, John Collins is those things. I just don't know what it would cost to get him from Atlanta, and or if he would really even be a good fit next to Bam Adebayo. But these are sort of just like names that I keep coming back to. Other than that, I don't really know the guy who moves the needle, and I don't know that I would want to give up a draft pick to go get one of these sort of guys who move the needle, but not enough to make the Heat like to kind of vault the Heat back up into that tier with like Boston and Milwaukee. So I don't know that I have a real name for you.
Good answers, both wrong. The correct answer is Kelly Olynyk. Moving on, most likely Heat player currently in the roster to be traded. Tobin, let's start with you.
I just got it. I have to think it's Duncan Robinson.
I mean, is it realistic though? Like, I think we just went through this in a recent episode where we listed all these possibilities, and I mean, who wants him at this level of production at that level of salary? And I just don't know. I mean, yeah, I think everybody would love that, right? Or at least, I mean, that's the expectation. I think in order of preference, we'd love him to be the shooter that he once was. Having said that, I don't think that's likely either. So I don't think he can get moved. So I don't know. I mean, I thought my mind was going at, but I don't know. I don't see him being the likely trade.
I just think I get what you're saying. I just think one, he does theoretically possess one of the most valuable skills in the league. So I feel like he fits with anybody. And yes, you have to take on the contract. So that's the big risk you have to take on. But to me with Duncan, I think the thing is, it's nice to hear like, oh, he's added all these elements to his game. He's, dude, again, I want him to be one of the best shooters on the planet. Like, I don't want Duncan Robinson to put it on the wood. That's not what I want him to get. But it's a noble thing. Great. Duncan Robinson has shown better court vision. That's not why he lost his job to Max Strus. He got gun shy. He wasn't shooting as well last year. Jimmy got fed up with it and wanted Max Strus in the lineup. Like, it's pretty clear as day as to what was going on there. Like, he was tired of having the 3 a.m. talks in the hotel room. It was, hey, I need you to be aggressive and go shoot. So I just feel like what a great story he's been. It feels like it's just hit its crescendo. Like, they don't have the perfect role for him. It feels like whatever minutes they're giving to him are token minutes. Every now and then, maybe he'll come out and hit a few threes and get hot. But for the most part, it's odd. But him like finally losing some time to injury, do you really feel like he's been missed? It's just like, no, he's kind of just been thrown in there because they got to throw him in there because he makes $90 million. So I just feel like that's the obvious guy, but I get your point. Who wants to take on that deal? It's a lot of commitment. I just think because of what he theoretically could bring your team, maybe somebody will buy and say that guy who was one of the best shooters in the league has to be in there somewhere.
Right.
Yeah. I don't know that there's anybody on the roster that is of great value that the Heat would be willing to part with. Right. And so you kind of just go down and try to answer the question, who's most likely? I kind of agree. Despite it being difficult to move Duncan Robinson, he probably is the most likely to get traded. And by the way, like this idea that getting traded is somehow a bad thing. Some players just need to change the scenery. Like getting traded doesn't have the stigma it once did. Sometimes it just works out better for a player's career. Duncan Robinson kind of feels like he might be in that category now of a guy who just needs a change of scenery. It could end up being better for him, and he could live up to that contract. Because I do agree with Tobin. Like the guy, I don't think he's not become an elite shooter. I still think he's one of the best 10 shooters in the NBA. It's just for whatever reason, it's just gotten weird. Like there's this weird juju that's happened with him in Miami. And I think if he were to move teams, it would be free. There would be less pressure, and it would free him up a little bit to play the way that and shoot the way that we've accustomed to see Duncan Robinson shooting.
All right, one last one before we wrap it up. We've all been in the locker room now. We've had locker room access all season long. A sharp departure from the last couple of years, obviously. But Tobin, who is the funniest, best locker room guy so far this season?
Let's see. Who is my favorite? I mean, I think in those random moments, I think Jimmy Butler is hilarious when he's just cranking up his music and trolling everybody. That I always find the banter between him and Bam hilarious. They don't do a lot of locker room, just media sessions anymore. They basically just go on the podium, and I don't cover them on the road, so I don't know what those interactions are like. But Jimmy's always my answer. He's always up to shenanigans and feels like he wants to troll people left and right.
Good answer.
I'll go with Kyle Lowry. I don't know that he's like the best, but I have been really impressed with him in the locker room after games. He's always really insightful and willing to talk in a way that I didn't expect. And you kind of get the sense of why people who have played with him and covered him just love Kyle Lowry. And I don't think we really got to know him very much his first year in Miami. I feel like we've gotten to know him a little bit better this second year.
Yeah, good point. Dwayne Dedmon, I mean, that's my vote. He's hilarious.
Always
in the background. Nobody wants to talk with him, and he knows it. He just wants to get the hell out of there, but he's still loud and making jokes at everybody's expense. No audio has come out cleanly this season with Dwayne Dedmon in the background. That's the whole. That's the reality. It's just he's always there yelling something, and I'm not sure what it is he's yelling half the time, but it's always funny to somebody.
Brendan Tobin, you can check him out. Tobin and Leroy, 10 to 2 on 560 AM, WQAM. And obviously, wherever you can get podcasts, their podcast is available on those platforms as well. So check out Tobin's YouTube channel with a bunch of takes every day, all the time. But that's it for us today. Thanks again for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Remember to subscribe to new episodes of Locked On Heat on YouTube and wherever it is that you get your podcasts. For your next listen, check out the Locked On Sports Today podcast. The biggest stories of the day, plus instant reactions, big game recaps, and the take of the day. It's available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts.